Then at 18, I ate my first psilocybin mushrooms and damn, it was love at first bite. Hello my friends of the Psychedelic Renaissance, it's Tom Hatsis, your psychedelic historian, and this is the evolution of my psychedelic spirituality. I decided to make a video like this that doesn't really focus on history other than my own personal history to clear up my spiritual beliefs, which became a little confused during my recent conversation with Peter Boghossian and an interview he did with someone else a few months ago that I can't seem to find right now. More on that in a moment. I'd also like to address something else somebody said in the comments of Peter and my interview that touches on this topic as well. I'm hopefully going to be doing more large platform interviews with the coming release of my book, and one of the interviewers that we've been in touch with, I'm not going to say who yet because I don't want to jinx it, but this person is also another prominent atheist, so it's possible that my beliefs are going to come up, and I just sort of want to clear the air as to what it is that I'm actually talking about. Beginning chronologically, I'd mentioned a moment ago that Peter did an interview some months ago with somebody that I can't seem to find anywhere. I was hoping to play the clip for you, but here we are. Anyway, in that interview, Peter mentions me, not by name, but he talks about a friend and a colleague who he has that lives in Portland and is writing a book about psychedelics and critical social justice, and I mean, he was clearly talking about me. So if any of you know what interview that was, or if you've heard him speak about that, if you could send it my way, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, during that interview, Peter had mentioned that, and I apologize, I don't remember his exact words, which is why I was trying to find the clip, but he says, he calls me either an evangelical Christian or a conservative Christian. So I'm not exactly sure where that came from because I am neither an evangelical or a conservative Christian, and I never have been. It's not like I was once a Christian and then converted out, or I started off not being a Christian and then converted in. I mean, it just hasn't been part of my life's journey or whatever. Point is, I've never actually identified as a Christian, so I don't know where that idea came from. I would say that much like Richard Dawkins, I consider myself a cultural Christian. I absolutely would not want to live outside of a Christian moral and ethical framework. I mean, they definitely got that right. And also, I'm just gonna say it, Christmas is my absolute favorite holiday. I mean, come on, good wine, good friends, family, good tidings, great joy, goodwill towards everybody. I mean, it's literally all the best parts about being a human wrapped up in a holiday. So I'm not a Christian, evangelical or otherwise. I am, however, a cultural Christian, and I will say that proudly, and I absolutely love Christmas. Before doing our interview, Peter and I had gotten dinner a few times to sort of feel each other out. At one of the dinners, Peter brought up the idea that if we were somehow to know that the spirit world is real, it couldn't possibly be because of a feeling. Now, unlike my last point where I couldn't find footage of Peter talking about me being a Christian, evangelical, or otherwise, I was able to find footage of him making the same point during an interview. And in that interview, he essentially says the same thing to the interviewer that he said to me over dinner.
So you walk outside and you look in the sky and it says, "I am God, believe in me." Would that be enough? And literally everybody sees it and you haven't been dropping acid.
I was dropping acid.
For me, the answer to that would be no. And it would be no because you'd have to be able to rule out other alternative possibilities. It couldn't be anything internal, right? It couldn't be a feeling state. Why couldn't it be a feeling state? Because people who have different God beliefs have different feeling states.
It can't be a feeling state? I gotta be honest, I find that there is a major presupposition happening here. Exactly what metric is Peter using to determine that we can't know the spirit world through a feeling? I mean, like, what scientific principle did he invoke to get us there? I didn't hear any. And yeah, a Christian taking LSD is probably going to have a Christ consciousness experience. A Buddhist on mushrooms is probably going to have a Buddhist experience. That makes total sense to me because we are all different shaped vessels. So consider divine wisdom to be like water, right? And we're different kinds of glasses, right? I'm a beer mug, you're a martini glass. Right? We're going to pour that same water into both the beer mug and the martini glass, and that water is going to take on a very different shape. Same water source, different vessel. The reason I bring this up is that, especially with 5-MeO-DMT, the feeling can be the conviction. Now, of course, feelings can be deceptive sometimes. Like, you might feel scared walking to your car in a large parking lot at night, even though there isn't really any danger.
No one's in any danger. How can I make that any more clear to you? Okay, it's an implication of danger.
So that's more of your survival skills just sort of doing what they do. While other times, feelings can be very telling of a deeper truth. Feelings seldom lie. Like when you're with a friend who swears that everything is fine, but you can tell something is wrong, even though your friend is trying to cover up what's wrong, the feeling is palpable, you can just tell. So we have to take a leap of faith here. Is the feeling deceptive or pointing to something real? Like, is it the parking lot feeling or your friend trying to cover up something kind of feeling? I personally find it very difficult, especially when I'm in that 5-MeO-DMT space, to consider it as anything but the deepest and truest feeling a person can have. And yes, that is very much real. And of course, I am absolutely open to being wrong about all of this. I'm just saying it doesn't feel that way. Now, moving on to my conversation with Peter. In the description box, it says that I was an atheist who turned religious after having a psychedelic experience. That's not exactly true either. Although I did go through this short, odd atheist phase in my life. You know what? Let me just tell you the story. So I grew up Greek Orthodox, but my parents weren't serious about it at all. I mean, we went to church maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and it was just during the holidays and, the parties and stuff. We were like, we were nominal, in our Greek orthodoxy. I had a vague spirituality in my teens, believing that there might be something bigger and deeper than materialism, but really just ignorant of the world and not yet totally in touch with my beliefs, which perhaps a lot of teenagers who weren't raised inside of a church might experience. Then at 18, I ate my first psilocybin mushrooms, and damn, it was love at first bite. It wasn't a lot. If memory serves, I split an eighth, so I had half an eighth with my friend Fernando. But I had some visuals and it was very pleasant, and afterward I felt like I had touched that deeper thing, whatever it is, beyond material reality. And so I started eating more mushrooms in my late teens and early 20s, trying to discover what that thing is. Perhaps because I was working with golden teachers, which have a very strong female presence to them, at least for me they do, I was opened up not to any biblical god, but instead to a goddess. And so I ate more mushrooms and really explored that goddess space, trying to hopefully form a relationship with her. And then, what happened in the early aughts? Yep. 9/11. And as many of us who were around in those days, the tragedy spawned the New Atheist movement, featuring best-selling books by Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, the so-called Four Horsemen of New Atheism. I read several of their books, and I did something that I've done many times in my life, and I really gotta stop doing, and if you ever do this, stop doing it, it's not good for you. What I did was this. I said, well, all these gents are much smarter than I am, and they all wrote books, and I've never written a book, so therefore they must be right. No. Just as a quick side note, as someone who has at this point written 6 books, I can tell you that writing a book does not mean you are automatically correct. I've made mistakes along the way. All writers make mistakes along the way. You correct them and you try your best to make fewer mistakes in the future. Anyway, the books of the New Atheist certainly made me take a moment of pause about my own developing beliefs. The time was around 2009, 2011, somewhere in that general vicinity of time. And I was working on a book I was working on 2 books. One was on the witch's ointment, the other was about the sacred mushroom. You see, in those days of my youthful indiscretion, I bought the sacred mushroom nonsense, hook, line, and sinker. I was absolutely a true believer. I was in this weird space that I totally believed it was true, but also didn't think that anyone who had written on the topic had made a solid case for it. So, like I read Ruck and I read John Rush when he came out, and for some reason I read Jan Irvin, lost some brain cells, but don't worry, I gained them back over time. The point is, I didn't think any of them made a good case, even though I believed it, so there was probably, if I'm being honest, there was a little bit of cognitive dissonance going on with me. So as I researched more and more trying to write my own book on the topic, I realized that the whole thing was total nonsense. I felt like I couldn't believe anything anymore. I was so wrong about the sacred mushroom, so I must have also been wrong about my theism. Now that, more so than any book written by Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris, not to discount how much impact they did have on me, but it was really discovering that the sacred mushroom, that there was nothing to it, that really pushed me into exploring atheism. Sort of. One of the commenters on Peter and my interview expressed doubt that I was ever really an atheist. And to that commenter's point, I don't think he's wrong about that. Which is why I quickly said in the interview that I became skeptical and started to question my beliefs. But, and here's where I give kudos to the commenter for picking up on this, when I would go out with friends and claim atheism for myself, part of me knew that I didn't mean it. I would literally go out with friends to a bar, we would talk about these ideas about new atheism, and I would always play along as if I was 100% behind all of it. I mean, I'd read the books, so I knew the script, right? But it was also the only time in my life when I felt like a complete coward and phony. And in that weakness, I started saying very ignorant shit. For example, one time as I was with my friends and talking about this stuff, Obama's religion came up. Remember, Obama was president at the time. Obama is a Christian, and I had said to my friends that I didn't think Obama was actually a Christian, and my friend Jake said back to me, well, why do you think that? And let me tell you, the answer I gave was the stupidest, cringiest answer I could have possibly given. And here's what it was. I said, President Obama is too smart to be a Christian. Oh my God. What an obnoxious, arrogant, downright shitty thing to say. So to any Christians out there, if you watch my stuff, let me just say real quick, my bad. I absolutely do not believe that, and I can say that I know plenty of Christians these days that are a whole lot smarter than I am. Anyway, there I was talking shit about President Obama's beliefs while I was being a total hypocrite. I believe the kids call that an epic fail. Not long after that, I left New York, traveled the country selling cannabis and mushrooms and teaching roller derby, and rediscovered my spirituality while on the road. Mostly it came about while I was translating documents to write my book, The Witch's Ointment. Now that I had determined that the sacred mushroom was total nonsense, I focused all of my efforts on The Witch's Ointment. Therein, in translating these texts, I discovered a goddess-based fertility religion that just so happened to jive with my earlier experiments with golden teachers and goddess worship. I began to actually try the spells I was finding in the source material, using my mushrooms, sitting in some rest stop somewhere in the country, setting up a makeshift altar on like a park bench, and rediscovering what it all meant for me. Then something happened major in my life, much like discovering that the sacred mushroom was total bullshit, that once again made me question everything. I landed in Portland, Oregon, just as roller derby was going, for lack of a better term, woke. People were throwing mindless accusations at each other, that's what they do. Suddenly everyone was pissed that guys were playing roller derby because patriarchy or whatever, and I just didn't feel like I belonged anymore. This thing that meant the world to me, this thing that I had dedicated my life to, I mean, many of you don't know this, I was involved in roller derby for 13 years, and it wasn't like, I wasn't standing on the sidelines. I mean, I ate, slept, pissed, shit, everything roller derby. And all of that was gone. And so I started to ask myself, is nothing sacred? And my answer was, no. Clearly nothing is sacred. Roller derby wasn't sacred. The sacred mushroom, even though it's literally called the sacred mushroom, that wasn't sacred either. I was just like, wow, I can't believe anything. So perhaps because I am maybe predisposed to being a theist, this all really rocked my world. I started believing that maybe I wasn't reaching entities or goddesses on mushrooms. maybe I was just talking to myself. Which now brings us to my first 5-MeO DMT experience. I'm not going to get into it here because I describe it in the interview with Peter already, so if you're interested in that, just check out the interview. But the cliff notes to that story is, I returned from my first 5-MeO DMT excursion, and my first thought was, well, fuck. I was wrong about that. Meaning, atheism. Not long after that, Mama Aya called out to me. I'd never thought about trying ayahuasca before because I was so in love with my mushrooms. I was all like, mushrooms are all I need. They're my sacrament. They're my medicine. They're my sacramedicine. What I realized was that while mushrooms were a gateway to show me that Gaia, as I eventually ended up calling the goddess, was real, ayahuasca, on the other paw, is the goddess incarnate on earth in every single one of us when we drink the brew. Now that I had seen the truth through 5-MeO DMT, now that I could no longer deny that there is a world beyond material reality, that the goddess is real, and that even beyond that, this cushion holding the whole thing up, which I call God, well, that's real too. And I thought, well, perhaps I'm not talking to myself. Through my relationship with Gaia, I discovered other goddesses like Hecate and Circe, who I have incorporated into my beliefs as well. So, I'm not a Christian, I'm not an atheist, I'm not an evangelical Christian or an evangelical atheist, and while it's somewhat true that the 5-MeO DMT literally just put the kibosh on me ever being an atheist again for the rest of my life. Again, the description box for the conversation with Peter and me, it says that I was an atheist, I had a psychedelic experience, and then I wasn't anymore. Again, there's way more nuance to the story than that, as I hope I was able to articulate for you. Anyway, so not a Christian, not an atheist, just a weird, woo-woo, witchy dude who eats mushrooms and sees and feels divine intelligence in everything all around us. That is the story of the evolution of my psychedelic spirituality. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you this time, and I'd love to thank you for stopping by. If you found value in this content, please give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment to let me know how I can improve. And until we meet again, I'm Tom Hatzis, your psychedelic historian, reminding you that you free your mind by using your brain. Peace.